So, Dan Ariely is a globally recognized professor of psychology and behavioral economics at Duke University and the founder of the Center for Advanced Hindsight. His research delves deep into the intricacies of human behavior, particularly focusing on the irrational patterns that influence our decisions in areas such as finance, health, and personal habits. Dan's journey into behavioral economics was profoundly shaped by his personal experiences overcoming severe injuries, which sparked his interest in understanding and improving decision making. Dan's work has reached a vast audience through his books, such as Predictably Irrational and The Upside of Irrationality, and his engaging TED Talks, which have collectively garnered many millions of views. These platforms allow him to communicate complex behavioral science in accessible ways, helping people apply these insights to enhance their lives. As a leading voice in the field, Dan continues to influence public discourse on how behavioral economics can inform and improve real world decisions. His work not only advances academic understanding but also a tangible impact on how we navigate the challenges and opportunities in everyday life. Wonderful introduction. I
Thank
mean, I'm so glad to meet you here. Thanks, Richard, for this opportunity. Definitely.
You're hugely welcome, Jason. And I won't interrupt you, but just I see join us here from Canada, from Guatemala, from Nigeria, from the UK, obviously. So do keep putting those in. Do let us know where you're calling in from, and maybe just put in the chat. Have you read one of Dan's books? Have you heard one of his talks? Like, what's been your experience with Dan so far? Just pop it in the chat. Maybe put the title of your favorite book in, perhaps, as we're doing this. Back with you, Jason.
And there we go for the introduction of Richard Foster-Fletcher. Richard Foster-Fletcher is the executive chair of MKI.org, a global community dedicated to advancing ethical AI development and implementation. With a profound commitment to fostering responsible technology use, Richard leads initiatives that empower leaders to navigate the complex landscape of AI with integrity. His work focuses on critical areas such as bias mitigation, privacy protection, and the broader societal impacts of AI. As an influential speaker, strategist, and advisor, Richard collaborates with governments, businesses, and educational institutions to promote ethical standards in AI. His insights into the ethical dimensions of AI and data science are sought after across various sectors, and his contributions have been widely recognized for driving meaningful change in how technology interacts with society. Richard's mission is to ensure that AI technologies are developed and deployed in ways that prioritize human values, inclusivity, and fairness. Through MKI and his broader efforts, he's committed to shaping a future where AI serves the greater good, fostering a more equitable and just world.
And most importantly, 2 meetings ago, my mum joined and said she was proud of me, didn't she? So that's what
Wow.
really counts. And we have Mexico, Dominican Republic, Mammoth Lakes, California, Serbia, Burkina Faso. Wonderful. How many is that? 11 countries so far? Plus Israel, of course. Lithuania. Okay, we're up to 14. And let's talk about Dan's new book. It's got
Yes,
4.4 on Amazon, I
absolutely.
believe, at the moment, which is pretty impressive.
I think I should introduce his book so that more and more people can, buy it and read it and get excited how we are excited. Dan Ariely's latest book, Misbelief, What Makes Rational People Believe Irrational Things, explores the psychological underpinnings of why seemingly rational individuals come to embrace irrational beliefs. The book is particularly timely as it delves into the spread of misinformation and the psychological mechanisms that make us susceptible to it. Drawing on Ariely's own experiences with misinformation and conspiracy theories directed at him, the book examines how stress, cognitive biases, personality traits, and social influences can lead people down a funnel of misbelief. This process gradually distorts their perception of reality, often leading to a breakdown in trust and social cohesion.
Fantastic. Everything you've said has been so succinct and complimentary. I would like to say that my journey down misbelief started before the most recent AI revolution, but it came toward the end of my kind of trying to understand the psychology, and it got me to be very concerned about what the world of AI would do. Kind of in this book, I basically describe a machine, a virtual machine that takes people and get them to start believing in all kinds of things that are not good for them and not good for society. It attacks emotion and stress, cognition, personality, the social system. And the main kind of finding, I think, in the book is those misbeliefs are not for nothing. They are a response to a need. People are stressed, they don't know what is happening, they're trying to find a solution, and they're looking for an answer. And I can give you some examples for this, but for example, tribes of fishermen that fish in the ocean compared to fish in the lake, the ones who fish in the ocean have a more unpredictable life and they have more superstitions. When life is kind of out of control, we have a need to control the world. If you're an animal in the jungle and you think there might be a tiger, you hone your system to look at every movement of leaves that maybe something is hiding behind there. So we're tuned to finding stories that explain what's happening in our very complex life. And we've created a system collectively as humanity that is taking those moments of weakness and pushing people into a very, very bad direction. And of course, AI could vastly accelerate all of that. And I think from all the things to talk about AI, one of the things that I am very concerned with is that imagine that I tailored for each of you the exact story that would get you to take one wrong step in terms of your beliefs. I would kind of stitch it. I would know what you believe in. I would start with things you believe. I would add one thing in the wrong step. I would identify the point in time that you're feeling stress and you're looking for an alternative understanding, right? You can see how that effort to derail people could be very, very successful.
Do you think we acknowledge how cognitively vulnerable we all are, Dan?
We don't. I've been studying irrationality in general for a long time. But one of the most interesting irrationalities is that we don't accept our irrationality. We can say, oh, these other people that they make mistakes. And, I ask people, I say, do you have a clear opinion about global warming? And lots of people say yes. And then I say, and what have you actually read? And then some people said the UN report. And I said, did you really read the UN report? And most people say, no, I read the summary. And some people say, I read something about it. The reality is that the world is very complex. And we need lots of trust. We don't read all the information about everything. We need lots of trust. And as this trust is breaking, lots of things are breaking. By the way, the story of misbelief, so the psychology of that is interesting, and that's what I mostly do in the book. But the wrapper around is a wrapper of trust. It's basically saying that the moment people, imagine I ask you the following question. Imagine the person you dated or you married started believing in some conspiracy. Which conspiracy will be the least harmful? Most people say believing that the earth is flat. Why? Because, if you believe in cancer treatment or vaccines or so on, you can actually make bad decisions in life because of that. If you believe the earth is flat, you can't change the curvature of the earth with your belief. It's harmless. But it's not really harmless. And why is it not harmless? Because misbelief has two components. It's about believing in something that is not true, but it's also adapting it as a perspective from which we look at life. And the people who believe that the earth is flat also believe that NASA is lying to them, and the US government is lying to them, and every pilot knows the truth, and they're lying to them, and every government is doing it, and there are no satellites. Some, by the way, some extreme version also believe that there's no Australia. Who would invent Australia? But anyway, but just think about somebody who believes that there are so many powerful organizations, NASA, governments, pilots, and they're all lying to them. Now you wake up in the morning, and it's not just that you say the earth is flat, you say, what else are they hiding from me? What's their intention? Right? So and now you start doubting everything. And you're frightened, and you think there are big forces in the world that are going to influence us, and it's a very, very frightening proposition. By the way, it's very good for online media, because now you have a cycle that gets to maintain people and creates a social group and all kinds of things like that. But for humanity, it's a very bad effect.
That feeling of powerlessness where you try and falsely create order. I mean, when you look at it and step back logically, I mean, I have a relative who believes that they've been putting nanofibers on the end of COVID testing kits to get them in your brain and track you. Well, first of all, that technology doesn't exist.
Yeah.
You know, then following that, it would cost somewhere between $60 and $100 billion to roll out that across the COVID tests.
Yeah.
Thirdly, the cooperation from the governments is unreasonable and impossible. And fourthly, come on, I mean, it's impossible to get anything done in the world, let alone organize that in a few weeks.
But just think about the damage that a belief like this is causing. Not just about would they take the vaccine or not, but what does it do to other vaccines? Like I've seen people, because I'm spending so much time in the dens of misinformation, I see lots of people who are now deciding not to take cancer treatment. I just spoke to somebody like that, right? The moment you lose trust, what else would you not do? So it's a very when we start not knowing what to try, and there's a story or a metaphor that fish don't know that they are in water because they're surrounded by water. To some degree, we're surrounded by trust. We trust that the bank will give us our money back, and that somebody inspected the elevator, and that somebody, if we buy salad, that somebody washed the lettuce, and we trust that somebody inspected our brakes. And like, if you think about it, we trust lots and lots and lots of things. As this trust erodes, lots of bad things happen. And if you thought about, imagine we kind of roll the time 10 years back, and I ask you to kind of give me the list of the 5 main problems the world needs to solve. I don't think that disinformation or trust would have been one of the top 5. I think it is one of the top 5 now. Why? Because I don't think we could take any action in any direction until we solve that problem. Just imagine any direction we would want to move. The first thing would happen is that this will be a political question. And then, of course, it will be very hard to move forward.
What's the story about AI, do you feel, at the moment?
Well, I think there are lots of stories about AI. I don't think it's one. On the more lighter side, one of the people in my research lab at Duke tried to get one of the LLM models to give her a title for the paper. And I said, don't do it. I said, it's such a creative task. You'll feel so much pride in your paper if you did it yourself. We're not in a game of efficiency here. Take the time. Think about it. If you don't find anything in a week, okay, get some help. But I say, don't take the joy away from you. Of course, she didn't listen. She was too tempted. But I think that's on the lighter side. I think there's a risk that we will take shortcuts in the place that could give us a lot of human satisfaction. I haven't studied this, so I think, if I wrote a poem and I got an AI model to write a poem for me, I suspect that the poem that was written for me will not be the same. I know that people take credit even on things they haven't done quite easily, but still, I think there would be a difference. So I think the pride of creation, I think the feeling of ingenuity. I don't think it's about just mechanically making things faster. So that's like let's call it the problem of the rich, right? It's something that I think would reduce quality of life, but for the people who have the time, I think we don't want AI to substitute the things that give us pride and meaning and a sense of accomplishment and so on.
So let's use that as a means to dive into our main topic, because it can do that in education, can't it?
Yeah.
It's going to add, it's going to take away. We have a technology that's very much out of the box. It's used apparently by 70% of students already and 30% of teachers. You've mentioned trust on this call already. So we've got two parts to this. One is the use of AI in education. And then the second part is the trust that we have to use that AI in education, knowing that it's a freight train that we can't necessarily slow down or even stop. So as we get into that, what's the state of education today? If we look at, maybe just go up to 18 for me here to start with, in terms of the schooling parts, like how big a problem do we have? What are we actually trying to fix here when we think about these technologies?
So we have recently, I have a group here in Israel that we have created a survey technology to check on how students are doing. And we used it for SEL, social emotional learning. Is there bullying? What's happening in the class? It's a system that goes to student, they answer a few questions, it gets to a system, it's automated, and the teacher gets a map of not focusing about the means, but focusing about the outliers. We want to understand the kids who are not in a good state. Anyway, so we had the system, it's been working for a while, and we recently added an AI component, and we added math and reading skills. And the AI component we use to generate the reading tasks. And this is fantastic because I can take you, I can find out what's a topic that are interesting for you, and I can create, why shouldn't I create a good reading comprehension text for you that is based on something that you're interested rather than something you're not interested? And then on top of that, we can grade. An AI model can grade the result, and that's fantastic. It cuts an unbelievable amount of time for teachers, and also the grading is much more nuanced. It's not just how are you in reading, it has multiple dimensions of how are you in reading and math, where exactly, and now we can create the next version for you. So I think on the grading side, I think on the text, on the material generating function, I think I'm a huge fan of AI. I can see all the differences.
To save time or to be more effective?
Both. One of the things we learned in COVID was that autonomy was incredibly important. That, during COVID, kids were studying at home. If you gave them material they didn't care about, they didn't read. If you gave them material that they loved, you got them involved. And I think the idea that if I have a class of 30 kids and everybody needs to read Chekhov, everybody needs to read Chekhov. But if I can find a paragraph of Chekhov or a chapter that they would like more than others, or maybe include a few other authors, everybody could benefit. So I think that increasing motivation, quality of grading, consistency, saving time and effort for the teachers, making it more interesting for the students, I don't see a downside for that. I don't see a downside. What I do worry about is I worry about the system when students are going through the mechanics but don't have a better understanding of the world. And I think the same thing happened a little bit in math, where, at the end of the day, where you say, how much is 7 by 8, or whatever it is that you're thinking about, you have kind of a mental model of math. What's the derivative? You certainly don't have an accurate answer in your mind, but you have kind of an idea of what's happening with a circle and a square, and what happens with time and distances and dividing, and you have kind of a general model, almost like a tool that you can apply. And when kids are just using calculators, they don't develop this model. So they can't tell you more or less what something is like. Like I love the idea that if I say, please multiply 7 by 8, but only tell me the range. You can tell me the range. And why can you tell me the range? Because you say, okay, I've figured out kind of a general sense, how much is 329 multiplied by 572? Give me a range. We can do that, right? We can have a sense of where these things are. And we call this a mental model. A mental model. And we develop mental models of the world, and that helps us navigate. How do viruses work? We have a mental model, and how food works on our bodies. We have a mental model, and what surgery does, and what's democracy. We have a mental model. But to get to a mental model, you need to have a holistic representation. And if all you do is you say, I'll feed the input, give me the output, and I'm not going to go on the journey, you're not going to get a mental model. And that's one of the things that worries me, right? So imagine that we did a whole semester on democracy. And imagine that you used some LLM model and you gave all perfect answers. And let's also say that you not just gave perfect answers, let's just assume you read them. You read them. But you didn't go through the process of wondering. You didn't make mistakes. You didn't go into wrong corners. What do you really know? Do you really understand democracy? I don't think so. I think that what I want you to do in democracy is to understand what is yes and what is no. What is in the gray areas between democracy. I want you to have a mental model of democracy. And if I just give you an instant of an answer, even if it's a perfect answer, I don't think you'll get there. And now you can ask yourself, why do you care? I care because I think people can't think critically this way. I think people can't think about the boundaries correctly. They can't think about changes they want to make. So I think now, can we solve it? Can we create an LLM model that would help with the mental model? Maybe. But in the current state of affairs, I think that the idea that it's a question-answer equation is not correct. It's a question wondering that is the important part, and we're not going to experience it in the current way we're using LLMs, or students are using LLMs.
So, but it's an opportunity and it's a threat. I mean, we've all played around with ChatGPT. You can ask it questions that you've been wondering since the dawn of time. You can get on to Blinkist, read a bit about a book you're interested in, jump on and just start chatting about that book. It's a phenomenal resource for comprehending and understanding things. Now, it's a bit left-leaning, it's a bit woke. It won't really give you the good stuff sometimes because it's programmed to never insult anybody in any form possible, which makes it a slightly dull intellectual sparring partner. For now anyway, but of course, ChatGPT is not the only tool in the world, and there are others with more freedoms. So it offers that, but just staying zoomed out a little bit. I mean, to what extent is what you're describing, how is it disrupting or actually breaking the existing processes we have in education, the standard processes of trying to get information understood, context, and then grade that understanding? Yeah. Does that still work now that we have these tools?
So I think there's some things that I just want you to remember, facts, or understand some story. And for that, it's perfectly fine, right? So if I say, hey, please tell me, how ancient Greek was structured in terms of the court system, and you say to ChatGPT, please do this, and you get an essay, and you read it 3 times, and you even remember it. Maybe if it's just the fact that I want you to remember, that's enough. Or a starter for a conversation, that's enough. But there are very few things like that. We're not really in a memorization world. What I really want you to do is I want you to think critically about democracy. I want you to be able to use your understanding about democracy to think about who do you want to vote for and what you care about and which organizations do you want to give money to and what are the threats to society. And I want you to figure out what do you want to learn next. And I think that without, okay, I'll give you another analogy. I wrote some books, and every time I write a book, there's about 20 versions. I write one version, then there's another version, there's another, and you could look at the last version, and you can say, why didn't I just write version 20? Like, why did I go through all the agony of writing 19 versions early on? But there's something incredibly important in the journey. There's something incredibly important in trying to figure out what do I really think? What do I really understand? Convincing myself that this is actually not a very useful direction. And I think this meandering around and trying to figure out what is right, what is wrong, what do I care about, what is going on is incredibly important for a real representation of knowledge. And I think that if we just give people the final answer, I think we will miss that. So I want people to fumble around.
So how much is that happening at the moment?
Not that much. I mean, the reality
what you're describing
is
doesn't sound like the status quo at the moment.
It's right. Look, the current state of education anywhere in the world is not that exciting. So it's not as if we have a very high bar that we're fighting against. But there is some approaches to knowledge structure, and there's some demands to think about this and so on. And creating these shortcuts, I think, will make it even harder that people would do it. Now, should we ban AI? Of course not. But should we pick the places that we want people to have a good representation of the world and work on it? I think the answer is absolutely yes.
How concerned are you? How blind do you think some of the leaders in the educational space around the world are to think about all the work that you've done over the years to understand the way that people act and the incentives and the disincentives and cheating and lying and bribes and all those things that you've spoken about in the past, which have been, phenomenal talks and books and so on. Like, how much of that do you think is being considered as they rush to say, my goodness, we've got to get AI now. We've got to get our teachers using it. We've got to, worry about plagiarism.
Your first question today was, how aware are we to our biases? And the answer is not that much. And I think that it is very hard to predict the long-term process. So, I walk around the world with this very funny-looking half a beard. So, no hair here and hair here. And the story of this half a beard is it has three components. I was badly burned, so all of this is scars, so there's no hair on this side. At some point I went on a month-long hike, so I got a half a beard. And people started telling me, thank you for the half a beard, because they felt it gave them some courage with their own injuries. Yeah. So for example, there was a woman who told me that she had a car accident when she was 17. She's now over 50 and she never wore a dress, and now she's going to start. But the real interesting thing that happened to me was that about 4 months into this half a beard, I started feeling more accepting of my own injury. There was something about, I think there was something damaging about the half shaving every day. I would start the day with smooth hair, no hair, little black dots here, and then after shaving every day, it became less non-symmetrical. And letting go of that was very healing, like a real interesting journey of self-acceptance. But I couldn't have predicted it. It happened for other reasons. The things that happen to us gradually over a long time, we are really terrible in predicting. So if you say, what will happen to the education system? Forget different AI. Current version of AI, 5 years from now, we are no capacity to predict. It will certainly not be what it is today, right? In the same way that when we think about social media, and we say we now have kids that are 12 that had 4 years of social media, it's not something we would have predicted when social media started. So I think we're not even close to grasping the implication of the current technology, and of course not close to grasping the implication of, and what's GPT-17 going to be?
But we can learn something from social media, and I won't put words in your mouth, Dan, but it has been very harmful in many ways, some of which we probably had sight of. I say we, that's the people that were developing, and some that we didn't. But overarchingly, it's hard to say this has been a net positive thing for mental wellness. What are the lessons then for this?
So I think look, and it's a very good analogy, because it wasn't too long ago that we thought that Facebook is bringing democracy. You remember the Arab Spring in Egypt?
Yeah.
Right? We thought Twitter and Facebook are advancing democracy. The world is going to be a very different world with them. And of course, it turns out to be quite the opposite. So, what are the lessons? I think the lessons are that unsupervised technology is not necessarily going to be advancing for the betterment of humanity. It's true for everything. We would never allow medicine to say, you know what, doctors, just develop whatever you want and sell it to people. No, we have amazing rules, right? It takes $1 billion to pass the FDA test. We would never say to car manufacturers, make whatever cars you want, no regulations. I think it looks like it has really good promise, but we have to be incredibly careful. I think the lack of regulation. Okay, my analogy for this is cars. Every year we have more rules for cars, and people keep on making mistakes. Like, think about cars. Crazy amount of regulation. Seat belts, anti-lock brakes, bumpers, lights, horns, things that blink, mirrors on the side, things that don't let you change this, distance. I mean, basically the engineers of cars have figured out that we're useless drivers, that we can't even focus for 15 minutes without help. And they did not come and change people. They didn't say, oh, you know what, let's do a more driver's ed. They said people are useless drivers, let's accept it, and let's make cars that would compensate for how useless we are as drivers.
And to your point earlier, we think of ourselves as brilliant drivers, despite what you just said.
Yeah, one of the biggest tests of overconfidence is how good of a driver are you, and the vast majority are above average.
Yeah, I mean, I am above average, but I take your point about others,
Yeah, and I think if we're useless drivers, what are the odds that we are not useless information consumers? Very low. Now, with driving, at least we see the bodies on the side of the road. When somebody makes a mistake, it's very hard to not see it. Yeah. When people make information mistakes, they stop taking a treatment, they reduce doing X, they start doing Y, they spend their money on whatever fake medicine. We don't necessarily see it in the same amount, but it accumulates and it has bad effects. So I think that there is no area in human endeavor that have flourished without thoughtful regulation. And I think for something as extreme as this, I think it will be crazy to think that it will advance well without serious regulation. And then the question is, what is the regulation? How fast will the regulation come? Regulation usually doesn't just pop up. Usually people do something bad, drive into trees, and then we say, okay, let's do something for that. With AI, with information technology in general, we have been very slow to reacting. Like, for example, the damage of social media has been very clear for quite a while. but we're very, very slow in reacting to it. And time is very expensive in the domain of information. Just think about this year, 2024, I forgot the number, but about half the world is going to vote. Incredibly important decisions are going to be happening in an information environment that is very unfavorable.
People say to me, are you scared of the damage that AI could do? Scared of the harms. And I think, well, we were doing a pretty good job of completely ruining the world before AI came along. We didn't need AI's help for that. We've almost lost the insects now. That's not a good one. So
I'll tell you what I think is different. And my story for this goes back to Coursera. So Coursera is a really wonderful platform trying to create university courses for the whole world. And when Coursera started, I was very excited. And I recorded what I think is a very good course. I hired somebody to do a video. I didn't just sit in the class. We went outside a little bit. I really worked very hard to create a very good course. And I taught it twice. And every time there were about 200,000 people, which were a lot for the time. Maybe now it's a smaller amount. And every time from the 200,000 people, I had one bad apple. And the first time I taught, there was one person who basically sexually harassed women on the discussion boards of the class. And on the second time, there was a guy that every time there was a bug in Coursera, he wrote my university and complained that I was doing experiments on them without permission. Now, of course, I wasn't doing experiments without permission, but every time the university gets a complaint like this, they have to investigate. So here I am, spending these weeks teaching 200,000 people, lots of work, and all of a sudden, almost every week, I have another investigation that starts and I have to divert energy and attention, and so it was terrible. And after that, I talked to Coursera and I said, look, I'm not going to teach again if you're not going to allow me to kick people out. And they said, but our rules are that we allow anonymity. And you kick somebody out, they can come again after a new thing. And I said, I can't do it. I don't know why. But in my class, every time I have one person who is really spoiling it for everybody. And we couldn't agree. Now I think that going back to your question, I think that information technology is giving disproportional power to bad actors. And I think that one of the things that we need to do as a society is to think about how do we protect ourselves. I love Coursera. I want to create an open system. But at the same time, if we create an open system and we have bad actors, and it spoils it for everybody, we're not really providing the value we want to.
But these are people with different motivations to us, aren't they, Dan, rather than bad people? And those motivations can lead to bad outcomes.
That's right.
I mean, there's
but the
money's
same
at the
thing,
heart of this, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah. And the reason I'm saying it is the same thing is happening online in all kinds of places, right? The amount of bots that are roaming the world, the amount of funding for all kinds of videos. These are people with very different intentions. And what we're doing is we're giving them this very powerful platform and making it very cheap for them to create tremendous damage. Democracy is very, very beautiful and very, very fragile. If you have somebody who is elected in a democratic system but decides not to play by the rules, they could do lots of damage. We are creating very fragile systems.
Yeah. I mean, and they are fragile. The applications that we're talking about, let's name them, the Facebooks, the X's, the Instagrams, the algorithms are quite basic. They're quite dumb, if you like. And so it's quite easy to see what you have to do to get a post to get picked up by the algorithms. We know all this stuff. We talked about it loads of times. You know, that kind of reaction that you want to gain from it will help it to succeed. So it's a bit like people are writing their CVs now, knowing that it's going to get read by an AI, not a person. And they get the AI to write the CV that's read by an AI. So now we're just second guessing algorithms, trying to work out how we break the system or trick the system.
Yeah. And you know, if you want to get the job, you're not a bad actor necessarily, but you could imagine that there could be bad actors as well. So you know, this is, so when I talked about misinformation, you know, one of the things that worries me is that now with AI, I can create the tailor-made misinformation for you.
Yeah.
That would push all the right buttons, that will understand the moment that you're stressed, that would push all the right buttons and will do the job for that.
And that's quite easy as well. It's not even difficult.
That's right. So, you know, how do we deal with that? So I worry about taking joy out of life. This was the story of my student. I worry about people not having a good working model of the world, which will not allow for productivity and creativity and true understanding and so on. And then I worry about bad actors.
But so let's think about that for a second, and I'll come to Jason in just a moment. I'm sure there's some questions that are burning from the chat. You know, let's just take ChatGPT, one of the most common tools used across the world now by teachers and students alike, run by a company with a board of directors. I think it's three white men, all very wealthy, all multimillionaires, all guys who happen to be very, very good at making money, who have produced, the company has produced a general platform that knows nothing. It's effectively a well-trained parrot. It doesn't specialize in education or protecting students or anything like that, but it's getting picked up and used across the board as if it was a tool designed for education. But it's going to get used, Dan, isn't it? So what kind of advice would you have, knowing that they are going to use it, they are going to implement it? It wasn't built for this, hasn't got the safeguards in place, it could destroy creativity, it helps students skip to the outcome rather than the learning process. How on earth do we navigate this?
So I think there's a couple of approaches. One is to say, you know, I really love explainable AI. Explainable AI basically say that we don't want just the answer, we want to understand how the system got to that answer. So one, and very hard to do, by the way. And when you realize how hard it is to get explainable AI, you understand how much we don't understand how this whole system works. But one approach would be to try and get any of those companies to create an educational module that has a version of explainable AI. And it doesn't give answers without an explanation of where it came from. And that talks back to the mental model. How are things working, right? Why did I get to that conclusion? I don't care just about the answer. I want to know something about the building blocks of how we got there. That's on the side of if we could ask the companies to do something different. I think if I was a teacher with students doing AI, first of all, I can think about how to make it more difficult for them to work with AI, which is to basically say, if you're working with AI, fine, but I also want you to explain to me I want you to highlight every assumption that was made, and I want you to rate how accurate you think this assumption was. So I can say, okay, I can't fight you doing that, but I'll demand extra work from you that would do that. Another thing I like, by the way, to do is, and that I always do, I ask people to always do a search for what they think, for what they're looking for, and also the opposite search. And you could also ask for the opposite essay, right? So you could say, okay, give me an essay about, how, Rome was great, but also give me an essay on this, and then do contrast. So I think we can work a little bit against that by either trying to make it more work, trying to get them to understand the structure better, trying to argue both sides of the equation, and even if they don't do all the work, it would mediate some of the harmful thing. But going back to the joy part, I write slower all the time. Like, I'm writing slower than when I wrote my first book, and I'm enjoying writing more. And it's kind of like drinking wine. I kind of think about it. It's a little slower. I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it more. By the way, I just finished writing my first kids book. It's not out yet, but it's a.
Well, I thought you were reaching for a glass of wine for a second as you.
A little early, but
when's the book out, Dan? When's it
Sorry?
When are we going to see the kids book?
I don't know, but it's a kids book on procrastination. But it takes some time to learn to enjoy the things that we do, and I think that's one of the things that, like, okay, this is like life philosophy now. I think that there's lots of things in life that we tell people, this is going to be painful and miserable, and it will always be painful and miserable, and you have to do it anyway. I think eating healthy is like that, and exercising, and sometimes education is phrased like this. And I think that this is just no recipe for good behavior. I think that we need to figure out, how do we help people find joy in things, right? So I think that the education system can also look at itself and say, how much fun are students having? And if everything we do right now is just looks like miserable tasks to them that they have to do anyway, maybe we need to look internally as well and figure out, how do we make learning more fun? How do we find joy in it? What is the exciting thing about it, right? How do we make learning how to read and write something that people feel as good as playing tennis? Why tennis, yes, and reading and writing not? I mean, there's some answers to it, but I think it's also a good time to say, we had this run by telling people it's miserable and you have to do it anyway, and I'll give you a bad grade if you don't, and we have to work into a model that makes it more fun.
It's the same with your career. I look around this room, Dan, and I know a lot of people in this room have worked really hard to work out, how do they enjoy this? How do they make this work thing fun?
But by the way, working hard, human motivation is kind of amazing. We're not really designed to want to sit on the beach drinking mojito. It's like, that's not a human achievement. We actually enjoy climbing mountains and writing poetry and doing startups and helping other people and trying to understand difficult things, right? Human motivation is really not about being like a goldfish at rest. Human motivation is very magical. But we've abandoned lots of things in kind of human flourishing in education. And we've made it more and more, we've made it too much. So, the dangerous thing is that if it's unpleasant, if education is unpleasant, or it takes a long time to start seeing it, kids will take shortcuts and never get the benefit. That's the danger.
But there's a dichotomy there. You're saying that, the Buddhist approach almost, aren't you? That life should be hard and that we should enjoy that in a sort of stoic way, which of course makes sense. And now you're saying it's got to be fun. Can it be both?
I think of joy, not fun. The separation for me is, look, climbing Mount Everest is painful. I watched lots of people running marathons. Nobody ever smiles. It's not about fun. It's about a sense of meaning. It's about a sense of achievement. It's about connection to ancient Greece. There's a lot of things about motivation. I mean, Stoicism is a different story, but there's lots of things about human motivation that is not about sitting on the beach drinking mojito. It's about look, we're all here tackling complex problems. Like, we could all be sitting somewhere else drinking beer and watching some sitcom, right? But we choose to think about challenging, complex questions. Now, for a long time, I think the education system has had the privilege of not having to worry about joy. But now that students can take so many shortcuts, I think it's our time. I think we need to do it in food. How do we get people to enjoy eating healthy food? I think we need to do it with exercise, and we need to do it with education. How do we can't just say to students, stop using AI, if what we're telling them is very boring, and we're not helping them see why they're studying what they're seeing. You know, one of the things I wanted to do, and failed so far, is I wanted each kid from first grade to say what they want to do when they grow up. And I wanted the school to call it the dream measurement, and I want schools to be compensated and rewarded, and not based on standardized testing, but based on what dreams their kids have. And I wanted for the kids to say, you want to be an astronaut? Here are the things you have to study. You know, basically kind of, you know, we haven't really done, I'm saying the education system, we haven't really done a good job in recruiting the students. We've kind of used our force to get them to do things a little bit like prisoners, rather than people who are truly interested. And I think this is a good time to say, you know, let's think of them as bodies that we need to help motivate into that direction.
But if we're always going to be bad drivers, aren't we always going to be bad learners?
We are never going to be more fun, in the same way that, you know, no cucumber is ever going to be as interesting in the moment as potato chip. But we can get people to change the rate of, you know, cucumbers versus potato chip. And I think we can also change the basics of enthusiasm about schools.
I still think we should just have an app that locks your car doors and pops up an alert and just says, nah, get the bus, you lazy sod. And just you can't get in the car.
Yeah. Short term, it's a better strategy. Long term,
it just locks the fridge. Like literally, you can't open it. Now we've got 5 minutes of our prescribed time, and we'll see if you do permit us just a few minutes, but we'll understand.
I sadly have another meeting.
That's absolutely fine. So, Jason, I think we can take at least one question from the chat. Can you read out one that you've spotted? We'll make the most of the last 5 minutes.
Absolutely. I'm going to the questions, and I think one of the most important question I feel for this forum is, how do we stop misinformation and gullibility of the public in general? It's by Mike.
Okay, so there's lots to do. This book I wrote, Misbelief, I promised the publisher a chapter on solutions. I don't have a chapter on solutions. I have lots of little sections I call hopefully helpful. And it's because I think that there's lots of things we can do individually, but the real big solutions needs to be government-based. And I will not get into the individual solutions here, but I'll tell you kind of one answer. We have this bias to trust people. And the reason we have a bias to trust people is we grew up, evolutionary speaking, in an environment with a small village. And imagine you live in a small village and you're going to live with those people for a while. You have really good reasons to trust those people. Why? Because you're going to keep on interacting with them. And if somebody misbehaves toward you, you'll gossip about them. And everybody will learn that they are not good people, and everybody will mistreat them, and that behavior would die away. Gossip and revenge are our intrinsic version of a police force and the judicial system. So we grew up evolutionary in an environment where it was the right choice to trust people. People were trustworthy. Then we moved to big cities, then we moved online. We have no reason to trust people anymore, but we're still trusting people. Now, should we change people? I don't think we can. I think the evolutionary forces for trust are just too large. I don't think we can fight against it. I also think it's a beautiful thing. But now what we need to do is to say, people are trusting, let's create information systems that are trustworthy. Again, people can't pay attention for 15 minutes. Let's make cars that don't demand them to pay attention too much. We are trustworthy. It's part of our human nature. Let's not create systems that are assuming that we will have good judgment and we will not be overly trusting. So for me, and I'm talking as a social scientist, everything starts with what can we expect the human mind to do? And now let's create systems that are compatible with that, right? So that is the approach, and I think if we use that, we would create lots of improvements. There are other things, of course, but that's one. Just to give you a couple of other tricks, I think we need to separate statements about truth from opinions. Right now, when somebody is saying something, you don't know if it's truth or it's an opinion. I think we need to really think about anonymity. I think there's a good chance that we should not allow for anonymity to happen, that people should really think very carefully about their reputation. Anyway, there's some other things like that. I think it's such a big problem that if we decided to deal with it, I think we could, but we have to decide to deal with it. And, somebody asked, is there something that is for sure true? I think the answer is yes. The earth is not flat. I think there are things that are true, but I'm also okay with people being skeptical. Being skeptical is fine. Is to say, I'm 95% sure that vaccines are actually very good for humanity. There's a chance it's not, but I'm quite confident that it is, and I'm going to make decisions based on that, but I'm not 100% sure. I think this is fine. I have to run. Nice meeting all of you. Talk to you soon.
Huge thanks, Dan.
Thank you.